So are we ready to go? All right. I'm going to call to order the regular Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting for Richfield. It's September 17th, 2018. Please note the attendance, and the mayor will be joining us when the other meeting completes. Our first item of business is approval of the minutes of the special concurrent City Council Housing and Redevelopment Authority and Planning Commission meeting of August 20th, 2018, and the regular Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting of August 20th, 2018.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any additions, corrections, or changes? All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, we've approved the minutes. Next, we will go on to approving the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, then we'll move on with the consent calendar. Executive Director Devich.
Thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. For those here in the audience and those at home, the consent calendar contains a number of items which will be acted upon by the HRA in one motion. Once the consent calendar has been approved, the individual items and the recommended actions will also have been approved and require no further action. Tonight, there are only two items on consent. Item A, consideration of the approval of a contract with TMS Companies Incorporated for the demolition of 1430 66th Street East, the old, or former, I should say, El Jalapeno Market. Item B is consideration of the adoption of a resolution approving a subordination agreement related to Cedar Point 2. And I want to say that you've been given a new resolution. The resolution is the same, except that there is a new name for the entity that we're dealing with, and the resolution that's before you contains the most recent name, and that's the only difference of the resolution. And that would conclude the consent calendar.
I'll move the consent calendar with those amended changes.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the consent calendar as amended, please say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, we've approved the consent calendar. That will move us to item number 4, which is consideration of the adoption of a resolution amending the bylaws of the Richfield Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Mr. Devich.
Again, thank you, Chair Supple and members of the HRA. I have served as the HRA Executive Director since 2005, and actually before that time, dating back to about 1985. For most of that time, from 85 to 2005, I was either the acting executive director, or for periods of time was also the director. Upon the announcement of my retirement from my role as city manager, effective the end of November, we looked at the bylaws related to the executive director position as described in Article 2, Section 5. And based on that review, we're recommending a couple of minor modifications, including wording to indicate that the executive director is charged with the management of the housing and redevelopment projects of the authority, and in an additional sentence stating that regardless of who is appointed, and that should probably include, I would think, the terminology as the executive director, the city manager of the city of Richfield shall have the ultimate authority in recommending an annual levy and budget. And then finally, a change in the language removing the requirement that an acting executive director, as designated by the executive director, must be the community development director. Furthermore, the bylaws have been changed several times over the past 15 years, some by resolution and others by simple motion. And to make it easier to retrieve the most up-to-date set of bylaws, the bylaws in their entirety is attached to the resolution. And so just in terms of, just more informally to talk about this, you know, with my leaving, and I have been, again, associated with the HRA one way or another since 1985, you know, over that period of time, typically the city manager has been the executive director of the HRA. That's just something that's determined by the HRA and by the city manager, I guess, as time goes on. At this point in time, with me leaving it, I do think it makes some sense to take a look at this point, having the community development director be the executive director of the HRA. That's coming up later on, but these two things are kind of tied together, and that's why we look at the bylaw change. And it's something that's not cast in stone. It can be changed by the HRA at any time. You can modify your bylaws, but that's why we were looking at this particular set of revisions. And again, the last thing and the most important thing is, and you can kind of see the way that I've operated as executive director, is I like to have the people who are actually doing the hands-on work make the presentations to the HRA. I'm involved with it, and I'm involved with the decision-making as the process goes on with these projects, but I'm not involved in the actual day-to-day, and I think it's also important for the HRA to see the actual folks that are doing the work on a day-to-day basis. The last thing is, the issue of managing the projects that come before us and making those presentations to the Housing Redevelopment Authority is one thing. The actual authority for making tax levy recommendations and the budget, certainly I believe has to stay with the city manager because that is the way the city manager form of government should be structured. So with that, I would stand for any questions anyone might have.
All right, do we have any questions?
No, but I will move the resolution with one minor change. And I spoke with Mr. Devich about it, and that was the one in section 5 where it reads executive director. In the sentence beginning regardless, I would recommend that we include the words as follows: regardless of who is appointed the executive director of the HRA, comma, then it goes on to say the city manager of the city of Richfield shall have ultimate authority in recommending an annual levy and budget. Just to make it clear, we're talking about no matter who is the executive director of the HRA. That's the reference. I read that sentence 4 times and it kept saying who's who. But,
Okay.
yeah.
So without objection, that's been added. I had one other question. Are we going to have to do something similar for the EDA when they have their next meeting?
Yeah, I would believe so.
All right. Are there any further questions? So you've moved the resolution with that change. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any further questions? All in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've changed our bylaws. Moving on to agenda item 5, consideration of the adoption of a resolution approving an amended contract for private development with Cedar Point Investments LLC for redevelopment of the Cedar Point 2 housing area with up to 80 units of for-sale townhomes. Mr. Devich.
Again, thank you, Chair Supple and members of the HRA. On this item, I'm going to ask Julie Urban, our housing manager, to make the presentation to the HRA.
Chair Supple, members of the HRA, the Richfield Housing and Redevelopment Authority approved a development agreement with NHH Companies on August 20th for the development of the west half of the Cedar Point 2 housing area with up to 80 units of for-sale townhomes. Further work on the agreement for the apartment portion of the project has revealed the need to make revisions to the townhome agreement to ensure consistency and collaboration between the two project components. The following revisions are being proposed. Change the name of the entity to Cedar Point Investments LLC to represent the partnership that will be developing the townhome portion. Allow for a completion date of December 31st, 2022. Clarify the means by which the HRA will buy back its property in the event that not all 80 townhomes are constructed, and given the fact that property lines may change or will change once the property is replatted and construction begins. To expand on that, I would just say that what we have settled on is if the developer ends up constructing fewer than 64 townhomes, the problem is that the land that's left may not match the land that we sold them. And so we are saying we would like to have a 20,000 square foot contiguous area sold back to us so that we could move forward with some other kind of development in that area. We also have removed the cross-default provision that allows the HRA to pursue remedies of default if the apartment project were to not proceed. So the provisions in both agreements, we believe, for buying back the property in the event of default will address this concern and also allow financing for the two project components to proceed. Since the financing for the two projects has now gone down separate paths, that provision was causing issues with the financing. And then finally, we made a few technical changes that were requested by the developer's attorney and agreed to by our attorney. And again, just to think about it, there are three really financial partners involved in this project: equity partners, a lender, and us as another lender and seller of property. And we just need to make sure that all three layers can overlap and work together. So if you have any questions, our HRA attorney is here and can answer more detailed questions. We can also walk you through the specific components if you would like. If you have any questions.
All right, does anyone have any questions?
I do. Just wanted to know how the purchase of the homes are coming along.
They have purchase agreements with 8 of the 11, and they have 2 offers out there. They're just waiting for responses, signatures. I believe in the case of one, they're just trying to figure out when's the best time for their family to move. And then there is a third, the final property, the third property, there's been some personal issues going on that has made it a little bit more complicated, so we need to be respectful of that. But so it's proceeding well. They have closed on 3 properties to date.
Thank you.
Would someone like to move the resolution?
I'd move to adopt a resolution approving an amended contract for private development with Cedar Point Investments LLC for the Cedar Point 2 housing area.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any other questions or any other comments?
Chair Supple, I should point out just that this also has an amended resolution. We missed the name change, so you have that in front of you.
Okay, but the resolution that was stated is correct.
Right, it's just that name.
All right, so all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, thank you. We've adopted the resolution. Next, we have a public hearing in consideration of the adoption of a resolution approving a contract for private development with, should this be NHH or Cedar Point 2?
No, this is Cedar
still,
Point 2. Yes.
This is Cedar Point 2 as well.
Just to forecast in October, we may be back to you with a new name that reflects that partnership. So.
All right, so we should say, so it's a contract for private development with Cedar Point Investment.
No, we should say NHH at
It's
this
still
point.
NHH,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
So we're approving a contract for private development with NHH Companies LLC for the redevelopment of Cedar Point 2 housing area with 218 units of apartments. This is going to be a public hearing, but first we'll turn it over to Mr. Devich for the staff report.
Again, thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. I'm going to turn this right over to Julie Urban to make the presentation.
Chair Supple, members of the HRA, the HRA approved a preliminary development agreement with NHH Companies back on March 19th, 2018 for the development of the Cedar Point 2 housing area. The agreement identified several issues to be worked out and established milestones for the developer to meet, including adopting a contract for private development by August 20th. Since that time, the developer has accomplished the following things. They've submitted plans for sketch plan review, submitted land use plans, submitted financial performas, submitted grant applications, reached out to all property owners within the development area, negotiated purchase agreements with 8 of the remaining 11 owners, and closed on the acquisition of 3 properties. Back in the summer, when we had done further study of the financial components of the project, we decided that 2 separate TIF districts were appropriate, and therefore 2 separate contracts needed to be prepared for the development. The HRA approved an agreement for the townhome portion of the development on August 20th, but continued the public hearing on the apartment component to allow us some additional time to finalize the agreement. So before you tonight is the contract for the apartment portion of the development, and it provides the following terms. The minimum improvements include 218 market rate apartments, approximately 188 underground parking spaces, the necessary public infrastructure, including streets and utilities, with a minimum market value of $33,136,000. The developer has identified a need for public assistance. The public assistance that is identified in this contract includes a TIF note from the HRA of approximately $3.96 million to the developer. Additionally, 10% of the TIF will be distributed annually to the HRA for administrative expenses. And beginning in year 9, an additional 10% of the tax increment will be distributed to the Housing and Redevelopment Fund. In years 21 to 23 of the district, 90% of the tax increment will be distributed to the fund for a total present value of $486,000. The TIF will be distributed pay-as-you-go, meaning that payments will only be made subject to sufficient tax increment being generated on the property to meet the payment obligation. The TIF district will expire in year 24 of the project. The HRA will sell the 14 parcels it owns that are located along Richfield Parkway between 63rd and 65th Streets to the developer for their appraised value of $1.11 million. The HRA will utilize those sales proceeds to pay the existing $780,000 assessment on the property. You may remember that assessment was levied against the property for the construction of Richfield Parkway, related to that construction. And also to just make note, the HRA did begin making payments on that assessment in 2017. The developer will provide 1 to 2 pieces of public art within the project area, but for a total of 3 pieces in the entire project. The terms of the contract require closing on the property to occur by September 20th of 2019, and constructions of the apartments to begin by December 31st of 2019 and be completed by December 31st of 2021. In accordance with newly adopted HRA policies, the developer cannot discriminate against tenants who are recipients of Section 8 housing vouchers and must provide the HRA with at least 90 days' notice of sale of the project. So as you know, the HRA's longstanding policy has been to support mixed income projects with 20% of the units being affordable, or to require that 15% of the tax increment generated by the project be contributed to the city's Housing and Redevelopment Fund. In the case of the Cedar Point 2 project, 25% of the total housing units will be affordable, total meaning both the apartments and the townhomes. However, that affordability is being provided entirely by the townhome component. And as you know, state law governing housing TIF districts requires that 95% of townhomes be affordable, and so that's where we get to that number. So while the project as a whole is consistent with the HRA's policy, there is also sufficient tax increment to provide a contribution to the Housing and Redevelopment Fund beginning in year 8 of the district and still have a financially viable project and one that can repay the Parkway assessment. The cumulative net present value of the variable contribution to the Housing and Redevelopment Fund is the equivalent of a fixed annual contribution of more than 9.5%. If you have questions, I'm available, and our HRA attorney is also available. The developer is here tonight, and Rebecca Kurtz from Ellers is here as well.
So before we open up the public hearing, are there any questions from commissioners?
I had a question just to the last piece. That 9.5%, help me understand kind of what that means in terms of real dollars or potential impact we could have in terms of affordable housing, weighed against, I think the intent of our policy on that to utilize 20% for affordable.
Well, I think that, what we heard from you and from Commissioner Vries-Daniels last time is that you wanted to see some of the apartments affordable, and the developer has looked at that component and decided not to, that path doesn't work. And so we took a look at the numbers, and the but-for analysis told us that while we are generating $4.4 million, the but-for says, you know what, 3.956 is what is needed to make the project go. And so that allowed us to have some extra funds, basically. And we said, given that desire for affordability, that we would put that in the housing and redevelopment fund. So we're looking at $486,000 over the course of things. I think it works out to, you know, it was important for the project to make it financially viable for them to have more funds at the beginning, the first 8 years. And so we are waiting until year 9 to get the funds, which isn't ideal, but again, trying to get a financially viable project, that's where we ended up. And so we get, I think it's $40,000 a year annually. And then at the very end, the last couple of years, we get a much bigger payment that gets us up to that total number. So, you know, where that gets us today, $486,000. It certainly doesn't generate lots of apartment units. They cost a lot to construct, but they perhaps, you know, through our new home program, maybe they through down payment assistance, or, you know, it has to be TIF eligible expenses. So I shouldn't say down payment assistance won't work, but purchasing substandard properties, you know, those things that are eligible with those funds is what we can do with it. So it doesn't translate neatly into units at this point.
That's helpful, and it's allows us to, I think, come closer to meeting, you know, what our practice has been. I guess I would like to hear from the developer about why a zero amount of affordable is possible with that many units. You know, I don't know if 20%, obviously I understand, you know, 20%, that might be hard, but I certainly would like to see some level of affordable and would like to hear why that's not an option from the developer.
Right. Go ahead and state your name, please, too.
Tony Simmons. I'm part of the development team. Thank you guys for having us here and reviewing this. The biggest issue with this project isn't just creating affordable housing. It's also understanding that in order to do so in today's environment with where the rents lie, we end up at a situation where the rents don't actually fill that gap. And unless we were to create a situation where we had significantly more TIF dollars and more funds from the city, it just doesn't ever get to a point where we could actually get it financed. And so in this particular scenario, we had to look at the global projects, not just the apartments, and say, how can we make sure that we're meeting the goals that we have internally and that the city sets forth? And in that vein, that's how we ended up compromising and trying to find a place where we could balance them out. Then when we went back and we looked through the but-for analysis and also through the greater portion of the TIF, rather than saying that we were just going to provide 15%, we said, why don't we try to figure out if we can bridge that gap even a little bit further in later years once we were able to get the project constructed. And that was really the intent.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I would just, I think I said something similar when this was before us. You know, I really recognize the decade-long challenges here and the specific creativity that's required to make this project work. And so for that reason, I'll be supporting this and just name that it'll be a continued challenge to look for opportunities to expand affordable housing in the city.
All right. Thank you. We're going to open up the public hearing now. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment? Okay, it doesn't look like it, but I'll ask again just to be sure. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to comment? All right. Since there is not, we need a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor of closing the public hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We've closed the public hearing, and now if someone would like to put the motion on the floor.
I will move that we adopt a resolution approving a contract for private development, and I want to make sure I get the right company name. Is it still NHH?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Companies, LLC, for the Cedar Point 2, Roman numeral 2, housing area and selling HRA-owned properties located within the development area to NHH Companies, LLC.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any further comments?
I have one, and that is you may not be getting the apartment component that you wanted of affordable housing, but overall it appears that we're getting 25% of the total housing units affordable. So I mean that meets our overall goals, which I think is good.
All right. So all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved it, and thank you to all involved for helping with this. Moving on to number 7, that's consideration of the acceptance of the Richfield Housing Redevelopment Authority Tax Increment District Status Update. Executive Director Devich.
Again, thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. The tax increment status update is presented to the HRA annually for review. There are presently 12 active TIF districts, and this year, as in other years, the status update shows that the HRA is able to meet all of its pay-as-you-go note and general obligation tax increment bond obligations. But to present a more detailed review, I'm asking Rebecca Kurtz of Ellers to make this presentation to the HRA.
Good evening. Again, Rebecca Kurtz of Ellers. And as Executive Director Devich said, the bottom line takeaway is you have 12 existing TIF districts, and we are anticipating that all of your obligations with the pay-as-you-go notes and general obligation bonds will be met. So that is the good news. But I do want to take a few minutes and just do some reminders of the types of obligations you have, and then I do have some highlights from all of the districts. I am not going to go through the entire report in detail, but I do want to offer that if you do have questions on items that I am not covering or districts that I have jumped over, I am happy to answer those questions, and please let me know. With your 12 TIF districts, again, just as a reminder, all of them are located within the Richfield redevelopment project area, which is coterminous with your city boundaries. Again, as a reminder, that allows the maximum flexibility to use that pooled increment that we referred to in prior discussions with the establishment of the new TIF districts. The obligations that the city has can be divided into 3 categories. The pay-as-you-go note are the most common ones and really kind of our first go-to. Again, as a reminder, those are obligations that the developer pays for all of the costs up front, and then the TIF is used to reimburse the developer for eligible expenses. For the HRA, that is a benefit because it provides the least risk to you. You are not obligated to make payments if the increment is not sufficient under a situation with a pay-as-you-go note. There are 2 general obligation tax increment bonds associated with your TIF districts. One is connected with the Best Buy project. The other one is with the Kensington project. Again, as a reminder, with the general obligation bonds, those are when the city issues debt and the general obligation is ultimately a pledge by the city to tax or use taxes with its full faith and credit if the tax increment is not sufficient to make payments. We can talk about both of those, but ultimately in both the Best Buy district and the Kensington, at the time the district is decertified, there will be sufficient increment to make any of those bond payments. The third type of obligation is an interfund loan, and that is when the city or the HRA provides cash upfront to most of the time get a project going. So it would maybe cover those administration expenses up front. It may help with some land acquisition or other typically preliminary expenses, and then tax increment is used to pay that obligation over time. One reminder with the interfund loans is those are adopted by resolution as a maximum. So the maximum amount may not ever be achieved, but it is that cap on what you can loan back and forth. And also depending on the status of the project and where we are in the term of the TIF district, that amount does tend to increase or decrease depending on the specific district. But that amount that you see in the report is the cap for the resolution. It is not necessarily the outstanding balance that is there currently. Again, just as a reminder, those are a resolution that we do every time we set up a new TIF district. Again, even if we don't anticipate needing to upfront costs, it does provide that cushion or that precaution that in the event cash is used to provide upfront costs, you do have the ability to reimburse yourself. A couple other items I just want to highlight before getting into the specifics of the district. In all of your TIF districts, you are able to retain up to 10% for administrative purposes, and the documentation is needed for those, but it is something you are doing so that you are able to recoup at least a portion on TIF districts, if not all of those administrative expenses. On some of your redevelopment districts, you are able to pool or retain a maximum of 25% to use on projects that are maybe outside of the TIF district. So again, looking at the affordable housing or redevelopment acquisition on blighted properties outside of an existing district, that 25% does include the admin. So with you maximizing the admin at 10%, ultimately it means 15% would be available through pooling. So getting into the specifics of some of the districts, I'm going to start out with the interchange TIF district, or more commonly known as where Dick's Sporting Goods are, or that shop is. You may recall that in January of 2017, the HRA did receive an invoice from Hennepin County that had settled for several tax years or market value petitions with the district. And so there was an interfund loan adopted that paid off that settlement due to the county because of the reduced market value. And at that time then, beginning with the February payment in 2017, the HRA no longer made payments to Dick's Sporting Goods or the Interchange TIF district, but was using the tax increment to repay that shortfall or reimbursement for Hennepin County due to the market value settlement. With that, one thing to note for the agreement with Dick's Sporting Goods, the final payment date on the pay-as-you-go note is February 1st of 2019, even though the district does have the ability to go until 2023 if there are obligations. So what we are anticipating is going to happen with this district is that the final payments will be made on this interfund loan for the reimbursement to the county by August of 2019. There will no longer be an obligation per the agreement with Dick's Sporting Goods. And so we are anticipating that after the August 2019 payment to the HRA interfund loan, we will be able to decertify that district and ultimately get it back on the tax roll. Those assumptions are made based on the market values for 2018. So if something unforeseen happens, there is a potential, I will say, that this may push out to that final payment on the HRA interfund loan into February of 2020. But again, we are anticipating that will be paid in the next year or so. With that, at the time the district is decertified, we would anticipate an increase in the tax capacity for the city of approximately $130,130. With that, Urban Village, the next one is moving along as anticipated. Revenues are coming in, the pay-as-you-go note is being paid, so there is not a lot to report outside of what we would expect with that district. The Gramercy TIF district is the one with Gramercy Park Senior Housing Cooperative, and that obligation was a pay-as-you-go note for $1,977,000. And also with this one, we are anticipating that that final payment will be made to the note holder in August of 2019. So again, with all of those obligations paid, we would be able to decertify that district to, again, anticipating August of next year. Under this note, we would anticipate the tax capacity for the city to increase by $287,365. So between those two, by 2020, we would anticipate an increase in the city's tax capacity of about $417,500. The Interchange West Lindale Gateway TIF district, as a reminder, has two components. The Interchange West is the Best Buy component, The Lindale Gateway has the Main Street Village project along with the Castile Place townhomes. You may recall that over the years related to the Best Buy project, there had been tax petitions filed to reduce the market value. There is a minimum assessment agreement of $118,500,000. They were successful in reducing the value some. In this situation, over those years of 15, 16, and 17, the HRA had withheld a portion of the tax increment, and so the settlement was, it was settled with the county for those 3 years, along with 2018. Over the last year, we did work with Best Buy, the county, and reconciled everything. So the payment that was due to Best Buy was made. The county has been paid full from the increment that was saved or retained, and that, at least for 2018, has been resolved. Jumping forward to the Lindale Gateway West or Kensington Park TIF district, this is one of the districts that has general obligation bonds. It is in the amount or the issuance amount was $2,970,000 of TIF bonds. Again, we have talked about this in the past, but because of several factors that have happened with TIF, with at one point in time changing in the TIF law and how market values are, or how tax increment is calculated, and then with some of the situation that this development went through, the TIF has gone down from what we had initially anticipated when the district was established in 2002. Ultimately, the district will be able to pay off its general obligation bond with tax increment. However, as we have discussed the last couple years, beginning in 2016, there was a shortfall where there is not sufficient increment to make those debt service payments. The HRA then did adopt an interfund loan resolution, and so we are making those semi-annual payments in full. The bonds mature in 2025, and then after 2025, the increment will go first to pay back that interfund loan that was connected with the general obligation bonds. We are projecting that loan will be paid off in 2026, and at that time, then increment can be used to pay off or make payments toward the interfund loan, which is in the amount of $1.1 million. Just again as a reminder, that interfund loan at the time the district was established had two components. One was $500,000, which was anticipated or expected at the time the agreement was put together to be paid off when the project was refinanced. That never occurred. And then there was a second component of $600,000 that was going to be paid off to the extent that increment was available at the end, after all other obligations are going to be paid. Currently, we are projecting that of that $1.1 million, there will be about $741,000 available to pay toward that interfund loan. I will say that number is going to change every year when I give this update, because to the extent that market values are higher, that number will go up. If market values go down, that number could decrease. But I would recommend not writing off that interfund loan at this point in time. I'm waiting till the very end, because we are anticipating there will be at least some increment that will be able to pay off a portion of that, even though it will likely not be in its entirety. The Cedar Corridor TIF district, we have been talking about that, and exciting things are happening, as you are well aware. Again, as a reminder, that district did receive special legislation that allowed it to be extended, and so the new decertification date is 2043 for that district. Currently, there are not any financial obligations with a third party. However, based on the discussions at the recent HRA meetings, as you know, we've entered into an agreement for development of the apartments, and we are anticipating a pay-as-you-go note in the amount of about 3 million or 3.96 million. That note will be issued at the time that qualified costs are provided to the HRA, so that we are anticipating it, but there is not an obligation yet for a developer or with the developer. Jumping forward to the Lindale Gardens TIF district, again, the redevelopment TIF district at the Lindale Gardens site. With this one, we currently have an updated agreement, and it does, as you are aware, contemplate 2 pay-as-you-go notes, one in the amount of 2.7 million, one in the amount of just under 1.5 million. Again, we have not issued any notes, so there are not technically pay-as-you-go note obligations. However, at the time that qualified costs have been received by the HRA, we will be back to consider issuance of the note and the obligation for that district. A new district that was established at the end of 2017 was the 2017-1, or the Chamberlain district. Again, with the development just underway, we do not have the final obligations issued yet, but as an update, we are anticipating the 2 pay-as-you-go note, or 2 pay-as-you-go notes, one in the amount of just under 8.5 million, the other one in the amount of approximately 1.4 million. When qualified costs are submitted, those notes will be brought forward for issuance. And then the last TIF district is one of our newer ones that we have been discussing. It's the 2018-1 for the development of the townhomes related with the Cedar Point 2 project. Also with this one, we don't have an obligation yet. However, we are anticipating the pay-as-you-go note in the amount of 4.2 million, and then there are the interfund loans associated with that. With the packet that was included, I did also, just for your information and as a reminder, include a list of the districts that have been decertified over time for the HRA, so you can see some of the successes, and that even though some of these go for a long time, 26 years, I know, we are able to decertify them and see the benefit ultimately. So there's a summary there. On page 19, there is a summary of the Housing and Redevelopment Fund. I want to note that the cash balances were as of December 31st for 2017, so tie with the audit, but approximately 2.44 million available. Those, as a reminder, are tax increment revenues, so they do need to be spent in accordance with TIF law, but are available for redevelopment efforts and for low-income housing efforts. There's also a map, and then following up with some of the discussion of last week or hearing, we did include just that brief summary that was presented. I believe it was at the time when the Chamberlain project was established, on just the basics of TIF. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but want to say that we are able to meet our obligations, and there's exciting things happening, as you guys know, with the development in the community right now.
Thank you for that very thorough report. Are there any questions? All right, would someone like to make the motion then?
I will move consideration of the acceptance of the Richfield Housing and Redevelopment Authority Tax Increment District Status Update.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? All right, all in favor of the acceptance, please say aye. Oh,
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Mr. Devich?
Thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. I just want to add, you know, we do TIF because it's a tool that we have to make a lot of these projects possible, because it is so difficult to redevelop. But at the same time, when a TIF district matures and it pops onto the tax roll, I mean, I look at it as kind of like a double bang benefit. For one thing, you have a very upgraded portion of your city that was part of that the TIF district. And of course, when it pops back on the tax roll, it's just a huge shot in the arm. When we look at the idea of the Dix district and the City Bella district coming on, those two together, just as a way of just kind of a way of looking at what kind of impact that is, that's like the equivalent of in 1 year adding about 150 average valued Richfield single-family homes into the community and onto the tax base. That's huge. That is huge. And you couple that with what we're doing in terms of some of our commercial redevelopment, and that's really what's happening in Richfield, and I think people will see the benefit of this long-term effort of getting Richfield to where it is.
Yeah. If I may, Mary.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I think the further development is the fact that people who come into Richfield look at it, look at what's happening in the commercial section, look at the quality of our housing, and people have maintained and improved their homes. And I think that's the reason that for the last 2 years, Richfield has been the hottest market in the metro area, because it's visible. There's positive things. We have bicycle trails. We're improving our streets. All of those things are real positives, and TIF has allowed us to do that. If we put up a sample of the before and after pictures for all of these developments, it would be a stark contrast. So,
All right. Thank you. Moving on to item number 8, consideration of the appointment of a new executive director of the Housing Redevelopment Authority to serve following the retirement of Executive Director Steve Devich. Mr. Devich.
Again, thank you, Chair Supple, members of the HRA. As everybody knows, I'm going to be leaving effective November 30th, 2018. And while my term is not formally designated, it expires upon the election of officers at the regular meeting in January. And so in the interim, I will be here for the November meeting. I will not be here, obviously, for the December meeting. And you will need to have an executive director during that period of time. And just to go on, historically, and I mentioned this in the previous item, the executive director position has been filled by the city manager. That practice is not required by the HRA bylaws, and many HRAs employ someone other than the city manager of that associated city to be the executive director. And so going on, what I'm looking at and what we're recommending here is that Community Development Director John Stark be appointed certainly till the end of 2018, which would be the December meeting, and then also for 2019. And again, that's because Mr. Stark is most familiar with what is currently been going on in terms of redevelopment, and he would be in the perfect position, I think, to serve as executive director. When you get a new city manager, that person may look at things differently. I don't know. These things are not cast in stone. You're always welcome to change that at some point in time. But our recommendation and my suggestion is that we just do what this staff report recommends for right now, and let's go forward with that and just see how it turns out.
All right. Is there a motion?
I would move to appoint Community Development Director John Stark as Executive Director of the Richfield Housing and Redevelopment Authority following the retirement of current Executive Director Steve Devich for a term lasting until the regular meeting of the HRA in January 2020.
I would second.
All right. First of all, Mr. Devich, thank you for your service. We will miss you, and also best wishes on your retirement. And I think Mr. Stark will do an awesome job, so you're leaving us in good hands. Is there any discussion?
I think at this time in our redevelopment, I think continuity is imperative, and I think Mr. Stark will do a wonderful job in the shoes of Mr. Devich.
All right.
I would concur.
All right, we have a motion before us. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the motion has passed. Next, we have HRA discussion items. Are there any items that commissioners would like to discuss?
I would just mention the stream of great stories we've seen in the media in the last couple weeks about the redevelopment going on in Richfield. There was a Fox 9 story about the $200 million in proposed redevelopment and in the Star Tribune. And Care 11 came out to PennFest yesterday and did another story as well about Red Hot Richfield. And it was literally Red Hot Richfield yesterday at PennFest. But take a look at those stories. It's just, in really all corners of the city, we're seeing that. We're hearing about it here tonight. This is a very exciting time for Richfield and for the HRA too.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion items?
A very minor point, not directly related to HRA, but I'll pass it along to staff. At the Penn Fest, I was talking with someone who walks the Veterans Memorial Park and the pool on the ice arena area. And their comment was she was told when the ice arena was built that there would be landscaping by the ice arena. And she thinks it's very plain. So as we look at landscaping by the new band shell, which we will be considering soon, just to kind of maybe look at all of our public buildings. I mean, this new building out here is lovely, and it does have lovely landscaping. And obviously, we don't want to spend a fortune on maintaining things. Whatever we do has to be long-term, easy maintenance, but maybe just take a look at it. I have no idea what's there. So, passing it along.
Thank you. Anything else?
Just at PennFest, and it has nothing to do with HRA, but I talked to one of the owners of Spargo and talked a little bit about their menu, and the only thing that really struck, and I don't want to discount everything, but it's all-day breakfast, so that's what we wanted on the west side for a long time, so we've got an all-day breakfast place opening very soon.
I didn't hear where it is. What?
Or Frango.
Oh, Frango.
Frango.
Is that on
Which
66
got a little
and Penn?
pub.
56 and Penn.
And they got a little pub in the Care 11 story too.
Did
So,
they? Good, great. Oh, that's a good start.
All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to the Executive Director's report.
Thank you. Chair Supple, members of the HRA, I really don't have a report this evening.
Okay, then we'll move on to claims and payroll.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've processed claims and payroll. Seeing no further business, we stand adjourned. Thank you.